Architecture is the best career. There is no better career than being an architect, providing you're prepared to work really, really, really hard. If you're not hungry enough to work all the time, there are better things to do. I think the risk is that hunger has possibly diminished.
Simon Bayliss is an experienced architect, urban designer and expert in housing design based in London. He is the managing partner of HTA Design, an interdisciplinary practice of architects and designers working to improve all forms of housing. HTA is recognised as a leading practice within the profession for its transparency, accountability and workplace culture, and has been awarded Employer of the Year 4 times.
You could argue the cost of living crisis is actually a housing crisis, because if we weren't paying so much for our housing, then we would have much more disposable income. At the moment, I think the profession is wrestling with its fall away in perceived value. I think there has been an erosion of the value in the architecture. So many areas of potential, so little time.
Simon, thanks for joining me.
No problem.
Why architecture? What is it about a career in architecture and design that gets you going, that keeps you coming back for more and getting up in the morning?
I suppose going all the way back, it's usually common to start with Lego. I mean, we all had Lego growing up in the 70s and the 80s. There were a lot fewer choices of things to do. We didn't have a telly, but we had lots and lots of Lego. I grew up near a farm. Grandparents were farmers, and the buildings always fascinated me. I thought a lot of this comes with the benefit of hindsight. You remember memories and you look back and you think, oh gosh, maybe that was important after all. But probably if I can track it back to kind of a pivotal moment when I thought, this is what I'm going to do, and I must have expressed a bit of an interest in architecture, was a friend of my grandparents was an architect and gave me a book called, I think it's the Book of the Modern House, which, looking back, I've still got its first edition, and it's got a foreword by Abercrombie. And it's effectively chapters of classic English house through modernist, including a Lebetkin plan, which many years later I sort of reflected. I think I remember Lebetkin when I was studying him at university. So if there's a moment when I think the turning point when I thought this is what I'm going to do, it was possibly holding that book, because alongside that book on the modern house was a magazine of Architecture International, which had sort of the trio. It had Rogers's Lloyd's Building, it had the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank by Foster, and Sterling in as well. And I think together that brought together this kind of classic old plans of houses that I could kind of study and look and try and work out how that all worked, and this kind of inspirational future high tech of how the world could be. And with hindsight, obviously I've gone into a housing world. The leather-bound hardback first edition was obviously more influential than the glossy magazine. Sure. But that's possibly the moment. And I think there's been moments along the way when I've thought, is this for me? And I've always turned around and thought, yes, it is. And I've stuck there. And I think every day I wake up and think that was a good choice. So I'm pleased with that choice. It's been probably way different to expectations, such as I had any. But it's a fantastic career. I've enjoyed it. I am enjoying it hugely.
And where do you draw the most value from personally in your career so far? What is it about the role of the architect that you enjoy, and that you feel that maybe where architects bring the most value?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that, isn't there? I mean, at the moment, I think the profession is wrestling with its fall away in perceived value. I think there has been an erosion of the value in the architecture. I think it's felt particularly keenly in the housing world where I work, where the sort of prevalence of design and build taken to its nth degree, where almost the design team has been sidelined completely from the process. That has led to a real problem in the industry. Grenfell might be the symbol of that, but there are lots of other examples of how I think construction and development have suffered through the sidelining of the design professionals, not just the architect, but as the leader of the design team. Often the architect, I think, probably has diminished the most. And so there's a big discussion now about an existential crisis, perhaps, maybe that's too grand a term, about how we regain that value. We demonstrate that value. I think we still offer that value. How do we demonstrate that value more clearly, and how do we regain, I suppose, some pride in what we do? So that's the kind of challenge at the moment. But the reality is, day to day, doing the job, we add value all over the place, and in doing so, we kind of add value to our self-worth. So going to work every day, running a practice, even in difficult times, overseeing projects, sitting through design reviews, being out in the profession, in the industry. I think particularly in urban centres, it's exciting. In London, it's particularly exciting, I find. I grew up in the Lake District. I grew up in a place where there was architecture and there was really interesting buildings, but nothing like I get to experience here.
Sure.
That variety, I think, every day is where the value comes for me in architecture as a career. And even though we as a practice are focused on a single sector, we're very broad in the design disciplines that we bring to that and the locations that we work and the typologies that we are involved in. So
I think that is the thing. I think when I think about and I speak to other people about architecture, the greatest joy is in the variety of the work. One day you're sketching, one day you're on site, one day you're in meetings. There's a huge amount of different experiences that you get, whatever position you are in, whatever point in your career you are at.
Yeah. Although you have to work to get to that point. There are periods in the early years.
Yes,
when
toilet partitions and all that.
Exactly. I did all the reflected ceiling plans for Ronald Reagan Airport in Washington when I was working over there for a while. Those things you think, is this really what it's all about? Of course it's not, but as with any career that's sort of worth its salt, you kind of have to do the hard yards. You have to get through the drudgery and understand the importance of that. And the extent to which technology has managed to kind of alleviate that, it's only limited. There's still lots of that you have to do.
So with that in mind, talking about your early career, when you were drawing those reflected ceiling plans, you obviously joined HTA as a part 2,
yes,
architectural assistant, and now you're a managing partner.
Oh, how did that happen?
Yeah, and I think that is a kind of an interesting sort of conversation to be had, because obviously the contemporary way that people maybe look for jobs, search for jobs, maybe that isn't for the long term. Maybe there's a skipping between roles that is more common these days. So I think it's interesting probably to reflect on what it's like to stay at a practice for so long and become part of that practice and become, owner of that practice sort of thing.
Well, was it planned? No, I didn't sort of go in thinking this is my moment. I mean, I think it's interesting to reflect for me why I ended up at HTA. It was Hunt Thompson at the time. I was doing a diploma in architecture and a joint diploma in urban design and a sustainability focus around housing at Oxford Brookes. And this is 98. I joined Hunt Thompson as it was then. The Greenwich Millennium Village competition, which was launched by the Labour government, sponsored by John Prescott, who died recently, was won by Hunt Thompson in collaboration with Ralph Erskine, in a time when collaboration wasn't really a thing. It's everywhere now, everyone talks about it, but I think they were sort of early pioneers of that idea, possibly because they thought they needed somebody like Ralph Erskine to give them that kind of credibility to win. But they beat everybody. I mean, Foster and Rogers I've already mentioned in an earlier comment, but Zaha was in and Hopkins and Grimshaw and all of the biggish practices of the day. And it was won by, Hunt Thompson. You think, who are Hunt Thompson and Ralph Erskine? And so it's all quite exciting. And really what they were proposing to do around housing, around urban design, placemaking and flexibility and adaptability was all really fascinating stuff I'd been sort of studying in a very abstract way in university. And an advert came out in the February edition of Architects Journal, and I applied and got a job. I've still got the letters. So I joined a practice that I was really fascinated by what they were interested in. And that's a pretty good start. So that, I was aligned with what they were interested in. But I actually joined at a time when there was a lot of change in the practice. And so a group of people who joined around about that time, within a sort of 2 to 3 years, and some guys within 2-3 weeks that I still work closely with, we all basically shared that same sort of vision. So even when the practice, we were young and junior in the practice, we had a kind of shared voice and we worked really well together. And actually those are the group of partners that are mostly still there today. Our head of communications, our head of landscape, most of the partners have been in the organisation for a long time. So when it came to the point that kind of the practice needed to move forward, it was sort of fairly natural that we all stepped up and said, we were hungry for it, we were itching for it. And then once we took over in 2013, we did a management buyout. I had a head for numbers and I ran all the financial side of it. We just kind of took it from there. And it felt like we'd arrived with a new chapter. So I've worked for the same practice for 26 years or something like that. But actually it's been a number of different iterations. But I suppose the key thing is I work with the same group of people, and that is a complete joy. I mean, that's a luxury that if you can achieve it, why would you move to another organisation when you have a kind of shared approach to your professional career, but also the culture of the organisation you want to create? So, yeah, I mean, I guess I got lucky, and some people I imagine move because they are looking for that perfect fit. But along the way, it's not been the moments when we've all had to work quite hard
of course,
to keep that going.
So do you think the real benefit is that shared vision? It is about that alignment, and that is that sort of perfect chemistry between you group of people.
Yeah, the risk we sometimes sort of reflect. We have a number of sayings, because if you spend that much time together, you start to get catchphrases, a bit like repeating lines from films and things like that. But the phrase that I'm just going to lean out the other way a little bit here, which is when we're all a bit too aligned with a kind of idea or a vision or a direction of travel or a cultural point or whatever it might be, or even a design. There's always someone who'll say, just a minute, hang on, can we just check the other side of this? And that keeps us, I suppose that keeps us, balanced, such that we look back and think we've done quite well to navigate the last decade in practice, nearly 12 years now in as HTA Design. How do we do the next decade? Because the first decade was actually easy, with hindsight. The last couple of years have been a lot tougher, but we've got to look forward positively, thinking there is a great decade ahead for all of us. But we're going to have to make it happen. It's not just going to fall into place. So that's where we're kind of at the moment. And that involves lots of looking outside and soul searching and leaning out the other way.
I suppose when we talk about sort of alignment and ethos of you as a group, obviously HTA are known as, at the sort of forefront of places to work. You've won the AJ award for that 4 times.
Yeah.
And obviously that probably comes from so much of a strength in alignment. I wonder if we can just kind of discuss that a little bit to kind of just highlight, I suppose, how you think you're capable or able to do that as a practice. Is it just about ethics and just about alignment of that? And I think particularly at a time when we see so much about employment in architecture and how people's experiences are in the career sort of thing. I think I think lots of people will be interested in your kind of insight into how you manage to have a practice that does these things.
Well, in some ways, I guess it's not that it's how do you manage to do it. It's like, how do you manage not to do it would be another way of looking at it. Some of it probably comes back to that kind of luck that we all got on quite well. We're a pretty sociable bunch. Even now, the partners have an annual partner with their partners and their children. Some of us we've mostly been to each other's weddings and godparents to each other's children in some cases. So there's a kind of social thing, which means we like spending time together. It's kind of, even when we're not working, we do find ways to actually be together. So that's, I suppose, a luck of the structure of the practice. It was always a fairly sociable place and a place that did many things. So when I arrived, they served lunch every day. We were reflecting recently that we used to get cheese and biscuits for lunch as well as the main course. I mean, It was sort of, that was cut out probably. And we all put on lots of weight, and we all went to the pub a lot. So there was a kind of that element. But actually, on the other side, the practice didn't necessarily do a particularly good job of being a good employer in other ways. So when we took over, we thought, we're going to spend all this time together. We want to be known, and we are known for making really great places to live, and that's around architecture and landscape and interiors. But actually, if you're going to spend all that time doing difficult things like that, let's have fun whilst we're doing it. So let's make it a great place to work. And that was the mission statement, those two strands really. And I suppose it's grown from there, and it's grown from the fact that we wanted to make sure we were paying people well and we were offering good benefits, and particularly benefits that were sort of cost effective for us to do as a group, that very expensive for individuals to do. Why not do all of those things? We enjoyed being in good premises, and so that became sort of every aspect of the practice was sort of beneficial to the working day. The lunch idea came from a fact that when the practice moved into Camden Town in Parkway, there was nowhere to get lunch. Right. So they went round the corner to one of the partners' houses and had lunch. That grew into a thing. And every now and again, we get to the point where we think, are we too big now? Do we need to stop lunch? Or there's an economic global financial crisis. Shall we stop lunch? And always the answer was, if we can't actually manage to serve lunch to everybody, then we should just stop being in business. And now it's kind of become this slightly massive thing. You know, it's part of the studio design. There's a big, but of course, on the back of that, you do design reviews there, you have evening events, and it adds to the culture. So we set out to, you know, be a great place to work. And I suppose some of these things along the way became focuses. Our focus on EDI. It happens, my wife's an HR manager, so she's very focused. So we talk about these things at home. My family, my wife is mixed race, so we have those issues. We have all sorts of things that we get to talk about that impact on our daily life and impact on the daily life of the partners. Effectively picked up and said, well, we can do better. We can do something about this. So I'm not sure it's something that we, consciously set out to be the best employer. We just felt we should do the right thing. Where we go from now, I think, is in rebalancing the future. Is about how you a high performing organization. There is a sort of, it's not all soft and we're wonderful. It's hard work. You still have to get the work done. You have to be talented. You have to come and work for us. You have to be quite committed, and all those things. That doesn't disappear. Yeah. But keeping the balance right and keeping the culture comes from the very top of the organization. And the AJ have often said, the interesting thing about HTA, it clearly comes from the partner team, and you've clearly got a fantastic HR team and a studio practice team that kind of support that and work that and bring new ideas and thinking to it. But it's not sort of outsourced to the management team to kind of deliver. So I don't think that'll ever go away, but it'll continue to adjust and evolve, I'm sure.
I suppose when you've invested so much into your beautiful offices, how, and obviously you do offer flexibility, working from home practices, how do you keep up that level of commitment and work ethic, and whilst also balancing, people using your space and getting the most out of it, sort of thing? It's
quite a challenge at the moment, I'd say, because not to want to talk about how difficult the market has been, but it really has been very difficult for many. And a lot of the reaction from that can be, we need to make this, everything needs to work as efficiently and smoothly as possible, and that needs everybody to be in. And the risk of that is it undoes some of the real benefits and the gains we've had post-COVID in people having a slightly more flexible approach. I mean, I think the idea that you have to be at your desk at 9 o'clock. So when we had our kids and my wife was going off to work, she wasn't at the I remember running from the nursery to the station to try and get to your desk at 9 o'clock. I mean, that feels absurd now. Yeah. And I know some organizations may be going back towards that sort of idea, but the fact that, flexibility is absolutely worth its weight in gold. But at the same time, what we do does benefit from being together. We've created a beautiful office space in our London studio, and our other studios are lovely as well. But how do you actually encourage people to be in when they need to be in? And I think we're wrestling with that a little bit. I'm not sure we've quite got the balance right.
Because I suppose the general market is pushing back the other way now.
It is, definitely. Sort of you can see in some surveys that, groups I'm involved in, it's definitely shifting back towards 4 or 5 days a week. And I think the challenge for us is to not be pushed in that direction, whilst making sure we're getting, what we need and getting the most out of everybody. I mean, not just for the practice, but for the benefit of their careers. I worry a little bit, I suppose, about the absence of my formative years in the studio with great people, really, passionate designers and passionate business people who really, I suppose, motivated and influenced me. If you took 2 days a week, 40% of your working day, you were to lose that, that's significant. Now, there are other benefits that might replace it, but overall, we make the cities and the places that we live in, and if we're not moving around those, and we could stay in our bedroom and see the whole of the moon, but we'd have to.
No, I think you're completely right. And I think that is that generational thing of the attractiveness of flexibility and working from home and that. But also, I think, generationally, we understand the value of being in the office. We understand, just through osmosis or through hearing conversations or actually sitting down with a pen and pencil with, a talented designer, sort of thing. You can get that tangible learning, I suppose.
And it's really interesting how the culture of offices has changed. I mean, I think I arrived slightly after they'd banned smoking in offices, but that's 25 years ago. Some offices still had smoking. But we were talking about this recently when we did the office renovation, and we talked about these kind of booths where you would go and make a call. And we'd been in a temporary studio for a while, which had been all a bit too small and hot. But these little booths were awful. They were awful places to spend time. They made you really consider your future options a bit. So we thought, well, let's not have those. And then we were like, but it's noisy in the studio. And we reflected on when we all started our careers, and people were on the phone all the time, shouting at contractors mostly, or having conversations with. The phone was sort of glued to your ear. You had your drawing board and then a computer, but the phone was actually the thing you spent the whole time on. And the offices were quite noisy. We were probably spread out a bit more. And so we thought, well, we'll do as much as we can to kind of acoustically soften the space, and we'll buy good quality headphones and microphones for everybody. And actually, it was a great move, because people do most of their calls and meetings at their desk, which means people around them are picking up that learning. And I think, so it's a whole host of ways that we all need to learn to work. I think for me, a sort of mandatory 5 days a week will not be a part of our future. I've said that now, I might regret that, but I can't see why it would be the way for us to operate. Particularly as actually even pre-COVID, when we all went and worked in our own studios, we worked across multiple studios anyway, and we work with the people that are most suited to do the project rather than where they're actually sitting in the office. So we were working relatively remotely.
So it's kind of inherent.
It's a little bit inherent, yeah. So some of our regionals, like Manchester and Bristol, are basically formed from senior people leaving London that we didn't want to lose. And we were saying, well, why don't we set up there? Started with one, and now there are kind of 15, 20 people in each studio, plus Edinburgh. And so, we were already working remotely. People in both those studios are running projects in London and other places. So it's not that big a leap. The thing to avoid is, 4 different people on a team in 4 different studios never being next to each other. So you have to work a bit harder at that.
I suppose with that in mind, obviously HTA are multidisciplinary now with a variety of different, specific skill sets and roles. How do you think that feeds into, I suppose, one, the value that you can bring to a client, and 2, the experience of your employees, being with those, the architect is next to the interior designer who's next to the landscape architect. Yeah. And I suppose, from a client's point of view, the value you bring in terms of the storytelling and the coherence of the design by having the same person or the same group of people involved in the design overall.
I mean, it's interesting that things start for a particular reason, but, reflecting on it, that changes as a narrative as you go on. So, we started with a problem. We were an architecture practice, HTA architects. So what we did. And architects then would probably consider themselves to be able to do everything, and to some extent, they even looked after the cost, and that was probably a strength we should get back to. We should relearn that skill of being able to manage cost and manage projects generally. But we had a landscape project, or a project with quite a large element of landscape, which the architects sort of naturally, waded into and realised they had no understanding or no knowledge of planting. And of course, everything's getting more specialist and more expert and more sophisticated and more complicated and more regulated. And 20 years ago, maybe a little bit, 22 years ago perhaps now, we took on James Lord, who's a landscape architect, who has now built a team of nearly 50 landscape architects, and they do amazing work with us. I say us, it's not me, I'm with the architects. Sure. I have to be careful not to put myself in the architecture crowd. But they also work with other clients doing work with other architects and other practices. And that, I suppose, we've got a sustainability building physics team and an interiors team. The interiors team, interestingly, came because the client said it would be really useful if you had an interiors team so that we didn't have to, get somebody else to do it. And some clients think there's nothing better than be able to come to our studio and talk to us on a number of projects with every discipline, including planning and communications design and wayfinding. Others take the view that they would rather have specialists from different practices, and actually both works fine for us. It adds, I think, when we were before we did the buyout, there was the business was structured a little bit in a way that created silos. So there would be a little bit of separation. We've managed to mostly remove that. I mean, mostly by removing it as a sort of profit center. We still report on figures, but and so now it's much more collaborative in that we will each review each other's projects, even if we're not kind of appointed on the work. And I think it adds a great deal of richness to what we offer and to the enjoyment of running the business.
In terms of the work that you guys do, obviously HTA is known as a sort of housing first, and you're obviously incredibly experienced in that sector and have written widely on that sort of topic. In terms of the sort of evolving market, HTA is now sort of positioning itself as, you know, that one of the prominent practices when it comes to co-living, student accommodation, social housing, things like that. Again, how much is that sort of through planning, through strategic sort of movement? Because obviously the residential market in London has changed incredibly, you know,
it has,
over the last number of years, and we're evolving, and I think you guys are reacting incredibly well to that. And I suppose it's just understanding how intentional that is. Is it about reactionary measures? And I suppose also how you see that mode of housing in the future and your role in it.
I think it's a bit of both. On the one hand, we are actually incredibly strategic, and we have Mike, one of our partners, who's been there way before I was, but he is out there in the industry talking to all sorts of clients, trying to understand the world. He's big into housing. He's been a big light in the housing forum, and he's written extensively with people like Mark Farmer on skills and innovation in the sector. So he's just into housing, but he's out there talking to clients and industry and politicians. So we are always looking, I guess, at what might be next. The build to rent sector, we definitely were ahead of that curve. We went to the States. Probably, I think I went in 2000 probably sort of just after the financial, so 2010 or something like that. I can't quite remember, but so a long time before there was a build to rent sector here. Studied what they were doing, learned a bit about it, saw the differences and similarities. And so when people like Greystar and other organisations came over, we were lucky enough to kind of pick them up as a client and stay with them for quite a while, and still now today. So some of it is quite strategic. On the other hand, things like co-living has come from working with clients who are in that rental sector, saying, actually, we're not sure we can get build to rent to work on this site. It's not quite right for a number of reasons. What about, other forms of shared living? And co-living was really that gap between students. So students I suppose it's quite an established form of living. We've done quite a lot of student historically. It works quite well on certain sites, particularly kind of tight urban sites, and it's great to have students in urban locations. And I guess co-living was a natural case, but we, rather than just sort of let's do a co-living project, we did a huge amount of research. We looked at projects around the world, very kind of lots of academic and metric, analysing what the spaces work, how much amenity works, where the amenity should be, what a good studio size is, things like the width as much as the volume and the area, how wide are they? And then, we some of the research we did on that was used to inform the GLA policy, and we were the first project to be approved through that policy. So it's never entirely accidental, but obviously sometimes things come through clients that you work with repeatedly that you look at something a bit different, and it's a bit of an evolution. And we'll anywhere where people sleep, we'll probably show an interest in, maybe not prisons, I don't know. And I think the city has been, in some ways, many cities were hollowed out pre kind of Jane Jacobs, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. I remember the difference between going to Chicago about sort of 15 years apart, actually, from going for the study tour and then going to pick up an award for one of our build-to-rent buildings in 2022. And the difference between the city that had been turned back in a place, central Chicago as a place to live, had completely transformed it in a fantastic way. Now, London hasn't suffered in that way. The most European cities haven't suffered like the American cities. But, the benefit of having lots of people living in a quite high density environment in the city is evident. And if that involves some height, well, I'm pretty comfortable. I've lived in a tall building before. I thought it was fantastic. So a bit of height is fine as long as it brings the green space and the amenities that go with it.
And do you think it sort of it brings about interesting and novel kind of design opportunities because of those, I suppose, because of the proximity of the people, because of the sort of shared space sort of thing? What you lose in your private space, you gain in your social space.
Yeah.
And I guess it is, I mean, you know, from when I've sort of studied it before, it's kind of, you're heightening all of those social aspects and things like that. And it's almost like a neighborhood within one building.
I mean, that's if when it works well and it's designed well, and there are some great examples in London, that is absolutely the benefit you can achieve from it. And I think we're doing a good job in London in particular, and it's beginning to move. We're beginning to see it happening in Manchester and Birmingham and other places, but you know, it's a bit more ahead of the curve, a bit more established in London. But some of the built and operating examples, you know, they really are brilliantly designed, and they have they offer a great service to the people who live there. I mean, I reflected on this when we first started looking at co-living, and I think a journalist said, you know, well, you know, it's rabbit hutches in the sky or something like that, and you said, well, look, when I moved to the city and I didn't know people, or there wasn't, you know, space for the people I knew, you end up renting a room in a house of people you don't know, and you get 10 square meters to yourself, and then a shared bathroom and shared other space, and you pay quite a lot for that. This, you get a 20 square meter studio with your own bathroom and a bit of a kitchen and all of this shared space. So on the first, you know, and an opportunity to meet lots of people without having to actually share the toothpaste with them. So on the one hand, it's a fantastic offer, I think. On the other hand, on this pure space, if you take a 70 square meter 2-bedroom 4-person, to get technical, what do they have? 17.5 square meters each between, you know, divided that by 4. In a co-living scheme, you've probably got 20 plus square meters to yourself, and all that shared amenity space, which, you know, if it's not particularly busy on a day, can be thousands of square meters. So I don't even think the metric argument really stacks up either. And I think there are lots of people who don't want huge amounts of space, who would rather pay a little bit less, have a serviced, safe environment, because their life involves more travel or staying at work a lot or socializing, and that it is the place to keep some stuff and sleep and be safe. So I think we're quite rigid in the UK and in London in particular on our regulations. And the problem with standards is that even kind of guidance quickly becomes sort of the requirement at planning. We're spending some time in other cities giving modular advice and finding that quite a lot of other cities have adopted similar sorts of standards. And everybody is kind of fighting against them the whole time. How do we get around this? Which rules should we break a little bit? Yeah. And maybe it has to be that way, but at the same time, we're sort of hard up against quite a lot of regulation and standard, which makes it quite difficult to innovate, I think, and to be creative sometimes.
I suppose just while the examples that you're using obviously feel very sort of generational and the next generation coming through and using space differently. I suppose just to bring it back to practice, you know, how do you feel like the next generation of people in your practice and people coming through, you know, what are the lessons they could learn from your career that, you know, and from, you know, your practice sort of thing? I mean, how do you keep that next generation coming in the door, passionate about architecture, and I suppose also, you know, understanding the evolving role of the architect in all of that, because you know, they're going to have to combat, you know, just like you've gone from one generation to another of drawing boards to different software, they're going to have to combat with this whole AI technology shift and shifting patterns in other things as well.
I mean, I suppose I'd reflect how incredibly lucky the next generation always is, because it doesn't have the downsides of the previous generation. So that's the first sort of starting point. You know, the other side of that, leaning out the other way, are the negatives that generally turn up that you didn't expect at the same time. You know, some people talk about the safety of the world. My recollection is we grew up under quite a big shadow of the Cold War. You know, it seems absurd now. Yeah. So every generation has its kind of its fears and worries. Actually, on the whole, the workplace now is a much, much better place for many more people than it was a generation ago, even in the 25 years that I've been working in a particular practice. I think employment practices have improved. Choice and opportunity have improved. But I think the risk is that hunger has possibly diminished. And I sort of hesitate to say something quite so bold because obviously everybody is different. But I think when I turned up to London, I was just absolutely hungry to learn as much as I could and to achieve as much as I could and to improve my understanding as much as I could as quickly as possible. I just wanted to kind of make progress. And I felt that the only way to do that was to work really like all the time. And there wasn't actually much else to do because museums weren't free and everything was, we didn't have any money. So we worked all the time, and then we'd go to the pub and hopefully a partner or director would be there to buy a couple of drinks, and then we'd go back to work. Now, we probably didn't quite get the balance right then either, but we did make some progress really quickly. And I don't think that's ever really, and having made some progress and reflected that the hard work got you through that progress, even when you were sort of in those moments thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to get these bathroom drawings, this door schedule done. You did get it done, and then you moved on to the next thing. And every time an opportunity came up, I sort of took it and thought, I'll run that project. I did a listed building renovation in Baker Street, and then I took on a big project in Gibraltar, and then I used to fly to Dundee and Aberdeen to do projects up there. And I worked all the time, but I absolutely loved it. And I recently did a kind of how to run a practice sort of thing with the London School of Architecture. And my reflection was, architecture is like the best career. There is no better career than being an architect, in my view, providing you're prepared to work really, really, really hard. And then it can be fantastic and the rewards can be amazing. But if it's not like, if you're not hungry enough to work all the time, there are better things to do, I'd say, and easier things to do that would possibly be more financially rewarding. It's funny because I have lots of friends who do lots of other things other than architecture, and they all work really, really, they do quite well, but they work really, really hard too. And sometimes reflect that maybe that's the point. It's nothing to do with architecture. It's to do. And then I sort of reflect what else is there, yoga on a Friday or walking the dog, or all the things that you might sort of decide you don't want to work so that you can do those things are much more fun when you've finished a great week of work. I do lots of other things too, but I don't know. I think that's where it started, and I think I never forgot how to keep working.
No, I think that's a really great takeaway from it, isn't it? It's about the work ethic in that.
Yeah. The brilliant, just to add, I suppose, the brilliant thing about today that wasn't there before. I mentioned earlier about being in trouble. Not so much me, but I remember my wife being in trouble, not being at the desk at 9 o'clock. I mean, the change to that is fantastic. The fact that I can leave work at a certain time to go and do something and cycle off and see the kids at a school event or something and be back and forth and work remotely and, drop in and do an event. Last night I did, and then I did a piece of work when I got home, and then I had to pick it up again at a call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I've got to go and do something not to work this afternoon. The flexibility, I think, is beneficial for everybody.
But is that just the technological shift, or is that the trust angle?
I think it's technology allowed it, but trust, it was crucial for it to actually be to work. And I think everybody abuses that trust at our collective peril. If suddenly it gets to the point where everybody says trust is broken down, you're coming back into the office, or you're 9 to 5:30 again. We potentially, I don't know. The risk is you lose all of those benefits. Some of the benefits have only come by accident through COVID.
Yeah, sure.
But they're genuine benefits, and they're benefits that we should all exploit. I mean that in a positive way.
And I suppose with that in mind, if I'm a practitioner listening to this, or I'm an architect thinking about starting my own practice, and I obviously want to take a lesson from your ethos and the things you've done well, is it just about giving a damn and ethos and wanting to make a change that all these things can happen, trusting your staff, adding in obviously the technological angle allows you to do these things. Why can't more practices do this?
Well, I think maybe some of them, lots aren't they? Maybe I don't know. I perhaps naively think that more practices are being more flexible and trusting. I might be completely wrong. I don't know. I think obviously you have to trust your staff. You put a huge amount of trust in your staff every single day. They have access to all of the information. They have, you feel this if there ever is any sort of breach where something gets reported to the press or something that's clearly come from inside. Or, I don't know. You have things where you think the trust has been breached, and I feel awful about it. And I know. It's a terrible feeling. So that doesn't happen very often, or if at all, because staff are generally quite trustworthy. People are trustworthy.
Yeah, people are generally good.
They generally do the right thing. And actually, they might be doing nothing at home, but plenty of people come to the office and do nothing in lots of employment situations. So if it being at home allows them, a message from, one of the team today who was coming in because we're doing a review and we had something to get out to the client, but has been up all night with their kid. Their kid's not well, can't go to school, but it's going to probably sleep most of the day. And I know them, they will be getting on with some work and they'll do loads of work. And so if you were rigid and you didn't allow that flexibility and it wasn't part of the kind of culture and that person didn't feel comfortable just being able to report that, I think you would lose it. So you've got to trust them. You've got to trust everybody. They trust you to look after them. You've got to trust them to look after you. And the extent to which some people breach that trust by not doing any work, you can quickly, notice that. And you can deal with it. Just deal with the individual issues, not a collective point. I mean, for the future of practice, if we're looking at more, trust everybody, but actually demand a lot. You can't make progress in any industry for any business without being pretty demanding. But I think what does that mean? It doesn't mean you've got to be here 16 hours a day putting in time for time's sake. It does mean you've got to produce, great work, and you've got to show your commitment and be interested and curious perhaps in more things. I mean, it's interesting to talk about the next generation and AI. AI is the big opportunity that we're led to believe. We're using it in the practice in lots of different ways. But interesting how most of the exploration work is being done by more senior people, perhaps people who understand the problem they've got to solve, people who have struggled with written word, jumping onto ChatGPT and other GPT tools and Claude and other things that allow them to check their work or to start them off or to give them a quick 200 words that they can edit or whatever it might be.
Completely, yeah.
Shortcuts. And it's kind of interesting that those that are stepping up into the practice, creating tools that then can be used by the rest of the practice, are more senior people. And yet when we were younger, definitely a lot of that, let's download this new tool called SketchUp was coming from the younger people. So have we lost something along the way? Is the hunger gone, or are the expectations different? Possibly a little bit. Maybe there's a cultural rebalancing to be found, but I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose just coming to an end then, obviously we've reflected on your career, we've reflected on your practice, your work, and the things that you've done as a practitioner and employer, sort of thing. With that transition from starting as a Part 2, now managing partner, has your career turned out how you imagined? Is being an architect in 2025 what you could have ever perceived it to be, and the evolution that it has been from, those early days?
I don't think the job that I do now is that different from the job that I might have assumed the job would be 25 years ago. But I don't think I expected to be doing this job. And part of that is probably I've never really looked a long way ahead. I've never sort of had the kind of end goal. There are certain things that I've felt I really would want to achieve that, but it's not necessarily been in a professional sense. I think, back to where I started, the fortune of being thrust into a group of like-minded people quite early on in your career and having a kind of collective run at it together has allowed us all to build a bit of momentum and to do more together than we would have done on our own. So possibly that's helped to outstrip. I think I've always probably been reasonably ambitious. I've been reasonably motivated, and I'm pretty keen to work quite hard. We did a trip to Sydney for some projects we're involved in with a fellow colleague, Sandy and Morrison, who's our head of design. And we got back to the end of it, and Sandy commented that it's possibly the best trip he'd ever done, because being with me, we got to work all the time. And when we weren't working, we were probably having a drink.
Yeah.
And therefore you combine the social and the professional activities together, and a kind of an ability to just kind of keep going at it and keep improving it and keep refining it and keep looking for better and keep opening your imagination to the possibilities. And I think we've managed to do that in our decade, 12 years. The practice we've run, we've become much more open-minded to the lack of limitation on the possibilities. And being in housing, it was all of our choices. It's what we're interested in. But it is actually kind of the global problem to solve. And tools and AI and our work in off-site construction and things like that are all part of that solution. But, I've said a few times around things like that, all of the crises that we live around at the moment, cost of living crisis. Well, you could argue the cost of living crisis is actually a housing crisis. Because if we weren't paying so much for our housing and we weren't less well and less well educated and less well located and having to drive a car, then we would have much more disposable income to cover the costs of things that are always fluctuating. Food, fuel, those sorts of things are quite prone to market distortions. And it's only really now that we're putting so much of our earned income into where we live that we create additional levels of crisis. We're less well, so we need more money for the NHS. If we were a little bit healthier because we had healthier housing. So, that's it's a professional centric view around what I actually specialize in. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think, every global city now has done a great job of making itself popular. People have moved to the city for economic reasons, and they all have the same problem, which is not enough good, affordable housing. And we need to solve that. So that is really exciting for architects. It's really exciting for HTA, obviously, but it's what we do. But for architects who often have not had much of a say or a voice in housing, it's a great chance to kind of add that value and turn ourselves around.
With that in mind, and with an ambition to, obviously with HTA, housing-based, solving problems in the future, what do you think is next for your career? You've obviously, communicated that hunger. And I think that's something that's come through the whole conversation is having that hunger and drive, and something that seems to have followed you all throughout your career. What is next, and what is the big thing that you're hungry for in your career?
Well, if we sort of take on the kind of permacrisis of the global condition at the moment, it's not just the UK, but the UK has obviously had a pretty chaotic decade where not a lot of forward momentum has been managed. There's been some seismic events, but they haven't actually pushed things forward in a kind of upward and upward direction. So if we're in a crisis, we've got to find some solutions. I've said before that we're in a mode of kind of multiple crises, but most of them could be kind of tracked back to the housing crisis in lots of ways. The global cities have done a fantastic job of making themselves attractive. We've just finished a project at Canary Wharf where you can now go wild swimming, and there are floating islands with trees, and it's biodiverse and has fantastic urban greening factors and all these other things. So people want to be in the city. But there isn't good enough housing, and there's not affordable housing. And so people are in, dire housing need. And they're paying so much for their housing as a result that they have less money, disposable income for food and medicine and all the other travel and other things they want to do, bringing about things like cost of living crisis. So, food and fuel and all these things have always fluctuated, but they've always been probably within kind of a margin that didn't actually matter too much because people had potential access to disposable income. If you're spending half of your income on housing, a third of your income on housing is the sort of recognised maximum sensible level. Many people are spending a lot more than that. Then everything else is going to suffer. So we've got to solve the housing crisis, and it's a global problem. All global cities, and we're going to visiting quite a few at the moment, advising on things like off-site construction, modular construction, which we have a pretty strong track record in. People are trying to find solutions, and we will find solutions. And actually, brilliantly, most of the solutions exist. It's a little bit like the energy crisis. If only we had a way of creating free, clean energy from the sun and wind, we could solve this. Oh, hang on a minute, we do. So a little bit like housing, we have designed and delivered the tallest modular building in the world. It's 50 stories and it's in Croydon, would you believe? And the one next to it, which is 44 stories, I think is the third tallest in the world. So the UK has actually got a really strong reputation for delivering some housing at the cutting edge of delivery. And that is an exportable technology and expertise. Other countries are trying to do it, and they're some way behind, but they will get there, and we can help them get there more quickly. So there's lots to do. There's lots to do in a better way than we've done it before. And we know how everyone. It's possible. It's been done. It's been tried and tested. It's not sort of made up.
Yeah.
It can benefit from new technologies, AI-enabled technologies, and better modes of communication. And we can, no doubt solve that crisis. And in doing so, if we are able to kind of restore the value of the design team within the wider development structure, to see them as kind of key, not just to actually just getting the job done, but to getting it done in a way that's better, that's more sustainable, lastingly popular, that people are still enjoying it in 30 years' time. Yeah, sure, we need to replace bits and pieces, but, people want to live here because it was brilliantly designed. And good examples of housing over our history have always stood the test of time. The bad ones have not survived. So we can do that, and that's exciting. We've always been quite domestically focused as a practice because housing tends to be a local issue. But all of a sudden, there are kind of technological reasons and particular areas of expertise that we may find ourselves travelling a little bit more, which is quite exciting. If it yields results. So a bit of that, I think we'll continue to develop the expertise in different housing areas. I think renovation and retrofit, refurbishment, whatever you want to call it, has been a big part of the practice's history, but not recently. And I think we would expect to do more. It's a really difficult gig in housing because many buildings are, struggle to be converted. It's risky and expensive. But actually in the city, in London, older cities, increasingly office buildings are going to be obsolete for office function because of the expected requirements for energy use. And so they need to be refurbished in something else, and that's most likely to be housing. And it's going to be really interesting when, say, the Lloyd's building comes up for no longer fit for purpose as an office. Do we get to turn it into housing? Wow. Imagine that. Yeah. Back to right back where I started with that magazine from my grandparents' architect friend. So, all of that is kind of there. For the potential of that, I think, is also significant. We've just done a refurbishment project on a historic mansion block where we managed to insert, I think, more than 100 ground source heat pumps between the buildings, which is now running effectively clean and in due course quite likely more cost-effective energy. So many areas of potential, so little time.
Brilliant. I think we'll call it a day. So thank you so much for joining me. Really inspirational.
Thanks for having me.
Conversation.